My billionaire ex-husband collapsed at his Christmas gala, and the doctor who rushed in was our secret son he abandoned. The crystal chandelier overhead caught every flash of panic as Vance Maddox's 6-foot frame crashed against the marble floor, his champagne flute shattering into 1,000 pieces that scattered like diamonds across the polished surface. The billionaire's chest seized, his manicured fingers clawing at his silk tie, while 300 of the city's most powerful people froze in their designer gowns and tuxedos, their gasps cutting through the orchestra's dying notes. The man convulsing on that cold floor is my ex-husband, and the young doctor now sprinting through the crowd with his hospital badge still swinging from his neck. That's our son, the one Vance never knew existed. Thank you to every single one of you incredible viewers who helped Mr. Steele Rich Stories surpass 1,000 subscribers this month. Your support means everything, and if this story touches your heart or teaches you something about forgiveness, betrayal, or second chances, please share it right now with someone who needs to hear that even the darkest abandonment can lead to unexpected redemption. What would you do if the person who shattered your world 26 years ago suddenly collapsed at your feet, and the only one who could save them was the child they abandoned before birth? This is exactly where I found myself on December 23rd, watching my son Zion push through a sea of horrified millionaires, his voice cutting through their shock. "I'm a doctor. Everyone step back, give him space." The irony wasn't lost on me. Here was Vance Maddox, the man who built a $2 billion pharmaceutical empire but couldn't spare a dime for child support, whose company Maddox Dynamics saved thousands of lives while he ignored the existence of his own son. And here was Zion Collins, raised in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment above a coin laundry in East Memphis, his medical degree earned through my double shifts and his own brilliance, now kneeling beside the father who'd called us a mistake before walking out that December morning decades ago. My name is Avery Collins, and I designed this Christmas gala. Every centerpiece, every string of lights, every carefully placed poinsettia. For 15 years I've been Memphis's premier event designer, transforming spaces for people who never knew I once scrubbed their floors as a teenage mother trying to make rent. What they definitely didn't know was that their keynote speaker, the great philanthropist Vance Maddox, was the reason I learned to survive on 4 hours of sleep and ramen noodles while nursing a colicky baby through law school nights I never finished. Zion's hands moved with practiced precision, 2 fingers pressed against Vance's carotid artery, his other hand already loosening the older man's collar. My son's face, those high cheekbones he inherited from his father, that determined jaw that was all mine, remained completely calm, even as Vance's breathing grew more labored. The crowd pressed closer despite Zion's commands, their phones out, recording the collapse of a titan while my heart hammered against my ribs. "Pulse is weak but present," Zion announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd worked 70-hour weeks in the ER since his residency began. "Someone call 911 and tell them we need cardiac support immediately. You," he pointed at a server, "bring me the automated external defibrillator from the lobby wall." I stood frozen behind the dessert table I'd spent 3 hours arranging, watching my past and present collide under the warm glow of lights I'd personally strung. The woman next to me, dripping in pearls, whispered to her husband, "That young doctor seems so competent. Vance is lucky he was here." Lucky. If only she knew that Vance's luck was the son he'd denied, the baby he'd accused me of lying about, the child whose birth certificate had a blank space where father should have been written. 26 years of anger crystallized in that moment. Every skipped meal so Zion could eat, every scholarship application I'd filled out with cramped fingers at 3 a.m. Every time I'd watched other fathers teach their sons to ride bikes while I held the back of Zion's seat, running in heels because I'd come straight from my 3rd job. Every moment I'd spent building a life from nothing while Vance built towers that scraped the Memphis skyline. The AED arrived, and Zion's movements became even more efficient, placing the pads on his father's chest with the same steady hands that had sutured gunshot wounds and delivered babies in the chaos of Memphis General's emergency department. The machine's electronic voice cut through the ballroom's tension, analyzing rhythm. "Stand clear. Everyone back," Zion commanded, and even the city's most entitled elite obeyed without question. I remembered another December night, 26 years and 5 days ago, when I'd stood in a different kind of room, the bathroom of the studio apartment we'd shared in Memphis, holding a positive pregnancy test while Vance packed his suitcase in the bedroom. "This changes nothing," he'd said when I'd told him, his voice as cold as the winter wind rattling our windows. "My family will never accept this. I have a reputation, a future. You're asking me to throw it all away for some mistake, some mistakes." That mistake was now the only thing standing between Vance and death. The AED delivered its shock, and Vance's body jolted against the marble. For a suspended moment, nothing happened. Then his chest rose with a gasping breath, and Zion immediately turned him onto his side, supporting his head with movements so gentle it made my chest ache. "Sir, can you hear me?" Zion asked, his voice professional but tinged with something I recognized. The same tone he'd used as a child when he'd found injured birds and tried to nurse them back to health in shoeboxes lined with tissues. Vance's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. They landed first on the ceiling, then slowly tracked to Zion's face hovering above him. I saw the exact moment recognition should have sparked, but didn't. How could it? He'd never seen this face grow from infant to child to man. He'd missed first words, first steps, first heartbreaks, and first triumphs. "You're going to be okay," Zion assured him, maintaining pressure on his wrist to monitor his pulse. "The ambulance is almost here. Just keep breathing slowly." The crowd began to murmur, tension easing now that the immediate crisis had passed. Someone started clapping, and soon the entire ballroom erupted in applause for the young doctor who'd saved their keynote speaker. Zion didn't acknowledge it, his attention completely focused on his patient, his father, who still had no idea he was looking into eyes that matched his own. I should have felt vindicated. Some part of me had thought about this moment for years, Vance finally seeing what he'd walked away from, finally understanding that the problem he'd abandoned had become something extraordinary. But standing there, watching Zion professionally direct the arriving paramedics, updating them on Vance's condition with clinical detachment, I felt only a hollow ache. The paramedics prepared to transfer Vance to the stretcher, and he grabbed Zion's arm with surprising strength. "Wait," he wheezed, his voice barely audible over the crowd's noise. "What's your name?" "Dr. Collins," Zion replied simply, helping ease him onto the gurney. "Collins," Vance repeated, and for just a second his eyes flickered toward the crowd, searching. They passed right over me. The woman he'd once promised to marry, now just another face in designer black among hundreds. As they wheeled him toward the exit, Zion finally looked up and found me in the crowd. 26 years of unspoken questions lived in that glance. He knew I was here. I'd told him I was working this event. What he didn't know was that I'd specifically requested this job when I'd learned Vance would be speaking, that some messy part of me had needed to see him again, to prove to myself that I'd survived and thrived despite his abandonment. The ballroom doors closed behind the medical team, and the crowd slowly began to disperse, their shocked whispers filling the space where Christmas music should have been playing. First stood among the ruins of my perfectly planned evening, overturned chairs, abandoned drinks, the podium where Vance had been mid-sentence when his heart betrayed him. This was the second time my life had shattered under Christmas lights. The first time, I'd been 22, pregnant, and watching the man I loved choose his reputation over our future. I'd been living in Memphis then, having moved back to my hometown after dropping out of the interior design program I'd started at a college in the Mid-South. Vance had followed me here, claiming he wanted to build a life together, that Memphis was as good a place as any to start fresh. His family's company, Maddox Dynamics, had a regional office here anyway. For 6 months, I'd believed him. For 6 months, I'd thought we were building something real. Then I got pregnant, and the man who'd promised me forever couldn't even stay for breakfast. Now, at 48, I watched my son save that same man's life, and I realized the universe had a twisted sense of humor. My ex-husband was being rushed to the hospital, kept alive by the son he'd never claimed. That son would spend the next hours monitoring Vance's condition, probably staying past his shift to ensure his patient's stability, because that's who Zion was. Dedicated, compassionate, everything his father had never been. And neither of them knew the truth that I'd carried like a stone in my chest for over 2 decades. Neither of them knew that in saving Vance's life, Zion had just opened a door I'd spent 26 years keeping locked. The silence in the ballroom felt oppressive now, broken only by the soft footsteps of the cleanup crew beginning to dismantle the beautiful chaos of the evening. Chloe Ramirez, my assistant and the closest thing I had to a best friend these days, appeared at my elbow with a glass of water I didn't remember asking for. "Avery," she said gently, "are you okay?" That was intense. The way that Doctor moved, he was incredible. Did you see how calm he stayed? "That was Zion," I heard myself say. "That was my son." Her eyes widened. "You're Zion? I thought he was working tonight, but I didn't realize he'd be here. What are the odds?" "Not at odds," I interrupted. "Memphis General has a partnership with Maddox Dynamics. They send residents to these events as part of community outreach. Zion mentioned it last week. I didn't think about what it would mean. What I didn't say was that I'd known Vance would be here, that I'd taken this job specifically because I'd seen his name on the invitation list, and some self-destructive part of me had needed the confrontation, even if from a distance. I'd thought I could handle seeing him across a crowded room, though 26 years had given me enough armor to withstand the sight of his success. I hadn't expected my son to be the one to save his life, hadn't expected the universe to force this collision with such dramatic, unavoidable force. The truth would come out now. It had to. The question was whether it would heal us or destroy us all. Chloe squeezed my arm. "Do you need to go to the hospital? I can handle the cleanup here." "No," I said, though every instinct screamed to follow the ambulance, to be there when Zion started asking questions I'd avoided for 26 years. "Let them stabilize him first. Let Zion do his job without me hovering. I'll deal with this later." But even as I said it, I knew later was rapidly running out. The secret I'd protected for over 2 decades had just coded on a ballroom floor, and my son, brilliant, compassionate, deserving of truth Zion, had brought it back to life. My ex-husband was being kept alive by the son he'd never claimed, and neither of them knew the whole truth yet. But they would, soon, whether I was ready or not. The January wind cut through my second-hand peacoat as I hurried down the streets of Midtown Memphis, my fingers numb around the coffee cup that cost more than I should have spent but less than I needed to stay awake. At 21, I was a walking contradiction, a community college interior design student who couldn't afford to decorate her own studio apartment, a girl who studied beautiful spaces while living above a 24-hour coin laundry that reeked of old detergent and broken dreams. Memphis in 1997 wasn't the glossy southern charm everyone outside Tennessee imagined. It was steam rising from manhole covers at 5 in the morning, frozen breath while waiting for buses that never came on time, and the constant calculation of whether I could afford both lunch and the textbook I needed for next week's assignment. My part-time job at Bookmark Haven on Union Avenue paid $8 an hour, barely enough to cover rent, but it came with one perk. I could study during the slow afternoon shifts, when only the occasional customer wandered in from the cold. The bookstore sat wedged between a dry cleaner and a vintage clothing shop, its windows fogged with condensation, creating a barrier between the harsh winter outside and the warm, paper-scented sanctuary within. 3 nights a week, I arranged displays, rang up purchases, and lost myself in the architectural photography sections during breaks, dreaming of the day I'd design spaces that would make people stop and stare. I'd grown up in Memphis, left for a semester trying college elsewhere, and come crawling back when money ran out. My mother passed away when I was 19. My father had never been in the picture, and I had exactly one cousin who called twice a year out of obligation. The city felt like both home and prison, familiar streets that reminded me I had nowhere else to go. He walked in on a Tuesday afternoon, snow, rare for Memphis, still melting in his dark hair, carrying a messenger bag that had seen better days and wearing a University of Memphis sweatshirt that looked like it had been washed 100 times. I barely glanced up from my structural engineering textbook. Customers usually found what they needed without help. "Excuse me." His voice carried a warmth that made me look up. "Do you have any books on sustainable architecture?" "Third aisle, second shelf from the top," I replied automatically, then noticed he was already smiling. "What?" "Nothing, it's just, you didn't even look." "That's impressive. I work here 20 hours a week. I could navigate this place blindfolded." I returned to my textbook, but he didn't move toward the architecture section. "Structural engineering?" He tilted his head to read my book's spine. Heavy stuff for a bookstore employee, heavy stuff for a design student who needs to understand why her pretty ideas won't collapse, I corrected, allowing a small smile. "The sustainable architecture books are still in aisle 3. Instead of leaving, he leaned against the counter. "I'm Vance, engineering student at U of M. And you're studying?" "Interior design at Southwest Community College. And I'm working, so unless you're buying something." He grabbed the nearest book, a romance novel with a shirtless man on the cover, and placed it on the counter. "Ring me up," I laughed despite myself. "You're really going to buy Passion's Thunderstorm just to keep talking? If that's what it takes to learn your name, absolutely." "Avery," I said, scanning the book. "And that'll be $7.99 plus tax." He paid with crumpled bills that looked like they'd been living in his pocket for weeks, then leaned against the counter again. "So, Avery, who studies design, what's your take on the new medical complex going up on Poplar?" We talked for an hour that afternoon, until my manager pointedly cleared her throat and Vance finally retreated to the architecture section, a romance novel tucked under his arm like a trophy. He came back Thursday, then the following Tuesday, always during my afternoon shifts. The pattern became routine. Vance would arrive around 2, buy something ridiculous, then spend an hour sketching buildings while I worked. "That column's too thin for that load," I'd comment, glancing at his drawings during slow periods. Since when does a design student know about load-bearing calculations? Since this design student plans to create spaces that don't kill people, he'd mock scowl, erase furiously, then slide the notebook over. "Better?" Marginally. Our conversations wandered from architecture to everything else. Favorite movies, worst professors, dreams we couldn't afford yet. But certain topics stayed locked away. When I mentioned family, he'd shift to discussing projects. When I asked about his life before University of Memphis, he'd turn questions back on me. I noticed but didn't push. Everyone in Memphis had something they were running from or trying to forget. 3 weeks in, I caught him staring at a travel magazine featuring luxury resorts in the Caribbean. "Planning a vacation on that engineering student budget?" I teased. "Just researching. My family used to travel." He closed the magazine quickly. "Hey, what's your opinion on exposed beam ceilings?" The deflection was obvious, but his enthusiasm for design was genuine. He knew things, specific details about hotels in Switzerland, resorts in Colorado, that seemed oddly specific for someone who claimed to eat ramen 5 nights a week. But when he smiled at my jokes or seriously considered my design suggestions, those inconsistencies faded into background noise. I told myself everyone exaggerated their struggles a little, made themselves sound more relatable than they were. I told myself it didn't matter where he came from, only who he was. Now. I told myself the small inconsistencies were just my poverty-sharpened instincts seeing threats where none existed. 6 weeks after we met, on a particularly brutal February day, when the heating in the bookstore kept cutting out, Vance made an unexpected offer. "My uncle has a place outside the city," he said, watching me blow on my frozen fingers. "He's traveling for the month. Want to get out of Memphis this weekend? You could study somewhere that doesn't require 3 layers of clothing indoors. Your uncle just lets you use his house? He's generous. Plus, I house it sometimes. Check on things, make sure the pipes haven't frozen. He pulled out his phone, a flip phone, nothing fancy, and showed me a photo. It's on a bluff overlooking the Mississippi. Quiet. Has a fireplace that actually works. The photo showed a modest-looking cabin surrounded by trees. After 6 weeks of freezing in my apartment, because the landlord wouldn't fix the radiator, the idea of a working fireplace was beyond tempting. Separate rooms? I asked, keeping my voice carefully neutral. Of course. This is just as friends, study partners, whatever we are. We both knew we were more than that. Had been since week 3 when our design arguments turned into coffee runs, then dinners at the cheapest Thai place we could find. But neither of us had acknowledged it out loud. Okay, I heard myself say, but I'm bringing my own food. I've seen what you consider cooking. The drive took 40 minutes north along the river, the city giving way to rolling hills and bare winter trees. We talked the whole way about everything and nothing, his terrible taste in music, my worst taste in late-night television, the buildings we'd design if money were no object. When we pulled up to the cabin, my stomach dropped. The modest cabin turned out to be a glass and steel architectural masterpiece perched on a bluff above the Mississippi River, all clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows that captured the winter sunset like it had been designed specifically for this moment. This is your uncle's place. I stood in the entryway, taking in the imported tile, the floating staircase, the art that definitely wasn't from discount stores. He does okay, Vance said quickly, setting down our bags. Come on, I'll show you the kitchen. The kitchen was a monument to modern design, high-end appliances, custom cabinetry, countertops that cost more than my yearly tuition. We attempted to cook pasta together, burning the bread and over-salting the sauce, laughing at our complete incompetence in such a professional space. All this equipment and we still managed to destroy spaghetti, I said, scraping char off the bread. Maybe we should stick to designing restaurants, not cooking in them, he replied. And there it was. Another hint about a future where we existed beyond these stolen moments. After dinner we sat by the fireplace with our textbooks, but neither of us studied. Instead we talked about buildings we'd create someday, spaces that would change how people lived and worked. His hand found mine somewhere between discussing cantilevers and conceptual frameworks. Avery, he said quietly, firelight catching the gold flecks in his brown eyes. I need to tell you something. I kissed him before he could finish, not ready for whatever confession might shatter this perfect moment. We moved together like we'd been choreographed, natural and inevitable, ending up in the master bedroom with its panoramic river view. Being with him felt like finally understanding a complex blueprint, all the pieces suddenly making sense. Afterward, wrapped in sheets that probably cost more than my monthly rent, he traced patterns on my shoulder. That thing I needed to tell you, he started again. Tomorrow, I said, curling closer. Tell me tomorrow. Tomorrow came with weak winter sunlight streaming through those floor-to-ceiling windows and the weight of his confession hanging in the air before he even spoke. This isn't my uncle's house, he said over breakfast, his knuckles white around his coffee mug. It's my family's. One of several properties, actually. The words didn't compute at first. Several. My last name isn't just Vance. It's Vance Maddox, as in Maddox Dynamics. The pharmaceutical company. I set down my mug carefully, processing. Maddox Dynamics had its headquarters downtown, employed half the city it seemed. Their name was on hospital wings and research facilities and charitable foundations. I walked past their main building almost daily. You've been lying to me for 6 weeks? Not lying, just omitting. That's semantics and you know it. I stood, needing distance. Every time you complained about being broke, every time we split the check at that crappy Thai place because you couldn't afford more, every single time you let me believe we were the same. We are the same. The money, the name, none of that is who I am. But it's what you have. What you've always had. My voice cracked. Do you know what it's like to calculate whether you can afford both coffee and lunch? To wear the same coat for 3 years because a new one means not making rent? You played at being poor while I lived it. I wanted you to see me, not my family's money. Then you should have trusted me enough to tell the truth. We argued through the morning, him defending his choice to hide his identity, me explaining how deception, even through omission, poisoned everything else. He talked about the burden of the Maddox name, how everyone who knew became different, calculating. I talked about respect, about how starting with lies meant everything built on top was unstable. I'm still the same person who sketches buildings while you work, he said desperately. The same person who thinks your design ideas are brilliant, who wants to create something meaningful with you. No, I said quietly, you're someone who thought I wasn't worth the truth. But even as I said it, I knew I wouldn't leave, not yet, because underneath the anger was something worse. I'd already fallen for him. The real him, or at least the version he'd shown me, and despite everything my rational mind screamed, my heart was already making excuses, already finding ways to forgive. We drove back to Memphis in heavy silence, the city skyline rising before us like a jury of concrete and glass giants. When he pulled up to my building, I finally spoke. I need time to think. Avery, please. You lied, Vance. That's not something I can just ignore. But 3 days later, when he showed up at the bookstore with coffee and an apology that sounded genuinely remorseful, I let him back in. Because at 21, I believed love could overcome deception. I believed that if someone showed you their true self eventually, the lies they told to get there could be forgiven. Have you ever ignored a warning sign because the feeling was too good to question? Have you ever convinced yourself that love could repair what dishonesty had cracked? I told myself his deception came from insecurity, not malice. I told myself everyone deserved a second chance. I told myself that what we had was worth saving. I believed love could fix what lies had broken. I was very, very wrong. The bathroom in my studio apartment was barely large enough to turn around in, but that morning in March, it felt like the entire universe had compressed into that 3 by 6 foot space. I sat on the edge of the rust-stained tub, holding the pregnancy test with shaking hands while sirens wailed 5 stories below, and my neighbor's television blared through the paper-thin walls. 2 pink lines, clear as the architectural drawings Vance and I pored over together. 2 lines that changed every blueprint I'd drawn for my future. My first thought wasn't about money, though I should have panicked about that. It wasn't about school, though I was barely managing to keep my grades up while working. My first thought, strange and fierce and immediate, was, hello, little one. I don't know how we're going to do this, but we're going to do this. The city noise faded as I pressed my free hand against my still flat stomach. 21 years old, 2 semesters from graduation, living on ramen and determination, and now growing a human being inside me. The rational part of my brain screamed about impossibility, the cost of diapers, formula, childcare, medical bills. But something deeper, something primal and unshakable had already been decided. I'm keeping this baby, I said aloud to the cracked mirror, to the water stain in the corner, to the universe that had just shifted on its axis. I don't know how, but I'm keeping you, I told him 3 days later, after my shift at the bookstore. I'd practiced the words 100 times, but when he walked in with his messenger bag and that smile that still made my stomach flip, everything I'd rehearsed evaporated. We need to talk, I said, flipping the store sign to closed, even though we had 30 minutes left. His face immediately shifted to concern. What's wrong? Did something happen? Something happened, I confirmed, leading him to the back corner between philosophy and poetry where no one could see us from the street. I'm pregnant. The words hung between us like suspended architecture defying gravity. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. The messenger bag slipped from his shoulder, hitting the floor with a thud that made us both jump. Pregnant, he repeated, like he was testing the word in a foreign language. You're sure? 3 tests for sure. Doctor's appointment tomorrow to confirm, but yes, I'm pregnant. What happened next surprised me. After the initial shock melted from his features, Vance's face transformed into something I'd never seen before, pure, unbridled joy. He pulled me into his arms, lifting me off my feet, spinning me between the bookshelves while laughing in a way that sounded almost like crying. "We're having a baby," he whispered into my hair. "Avery, we're having a baby. You're not angry? Scared?" He set me down, cupping my face with both hands. Scared? Absolutely. But angry? How could I be angry about creating something with you? His thumb traced my cheekbone. "We'll figure it out. We'll get a place together. Nothing fancy, just somewhere safe. I'll take extra work. You can reduce your hours here once you're further along. My trust fund kicks in when I'm 25. That's only 3 years away. We can do this." For 2 weeks, we lived in a bubble of cautious optimism. We looked at apartments in less expensive parts of town we couldn't quite afford, made lists of baby names during my bookstore shifts, debated whether to find out the gender. Vance sketched designs for cribs that converted into toddler beds, always thinking ahead, always planning for a future that included all 3 of us. "My parents want to meet you," he said one evening, and the bubble began to shimmer dangerously. The restaurant was the kind of place where water came in crystal goblets, and the menu had no prices listed. Vance arrived 20 minutes late, his face pale and drawn in a way that made my heart sink before he even sat down. "They already knew," he said without preamble, sliding into the booth across from me. "Someone from the university saw us at the clinic when you had your appointment. Word got back to them. And," he couldn't meet my eyes, "my father called you a situation that needs handling. My mother suggested we consider alternatives." Alternatives. The word tasted like ash. "You mean abortion?" I told them no. I told them we're keeping the baby, that I love you, that this is my choice. His hands shook as he reached for his water. My father. He didn't take it well. Richard Maddox, I learned that night, didn't just get angry, he got strategic. Vance recounted the conversation in devastating detail. His father had laid out exactly what choosing me would cost. No position at Maddox Dynamics. No access to the trust fund until he was 30 instead of 25. No family support of any kind. Elena Maddox had been quieter but no less cruel, suggesting that girls like that knew exactly what they were doing when they trapped men from established families. Girls like what? I'd asked, though I already knew. Poor girls. Ambitious girls. Girls who didn't belong in rooms with crystal water goblets. "I told them they were wrong about you," Vance said, finally meeting my eyes. "I told them I chose you. I chose our baby. I choose the life we're building." But even as he said it, I heard the tremor in his voice, saw the way his fingers drummed against the table. A nervous habit I'd learned meant he was calculating, planning, trying to find angles in an impossible equation. "I just need a few days," he said as we stood outside the restaurant, the March wind cutting through my coat, "to sort things out, to make them understand. This doesn't change anything between us, Avery. I love you. I love our baby." He kissed me then, desperate and deep, like he was trying to transfer certainty through touch alone. When he pulled back, his eyes were wet. "A few days," I repeated, wanting to believe him. "And then we start our life, the real one. Not the one my parents planned, but the one we chose." I walked home that night, with my hand pressed protectively over my stomach, whispering to the tiny life inside me, "Your father says he chooses us. Let's hope he means it." The apartment felt colder than usual when I returned, or maybe it was just the chill that had settled in my bones during that restaurant conversation. I made tea I couldn't afford, and sat by the window, watching Memphis traffic crawl past 5 stories below, each car full of people with their own complications, their own impossible choices. 3 days turned into a week. His phone went straight to voicemail. He didn't show up at the bookstore for our usual Tuesday meeting. By day 10, I was beyond worried. I was desperate. I took the bus to the University of Memphis, but his roommate said he'd packed a bag and left, muttering something about family business. I went to the Maddox Dynamics building downtown, but security wouldn't let me past the lobby without an appointment. Finally, on day 12, I spent my last $40 on a rideshare to the River House. The housekeeper who answered the door looked at me with a mixture of pity and discomfort that told me everything before she even spoke. "Mr. Vance isn't here," she said carefully. "He's traveling where? Europe, I believe." Mr. Richard made the arrangements. Extended business training, he called it. Learning international operations. Business training. They'd sent him away like a problem to be solved, and he'd gone. No goodbye, no explanation, no forwarding address, just absence where promises used to live. I walked the 3 miles to the nearest bus stop because I'd spent my last money getting there. The housekeeper had offered to call me a cab, but I couldn't bear accepting charity from the people who'd orchestrated my abandonment. 5 hours later, I was back in my studio apartment, staring at the same cracked mirror where I'd promised to keep this baby. Only now I understood I'd be keeping that promise alone. That night, I sat on my small balcony despite the cold, looking out at a city that suddenly felt both infinite and crushingly small. Somewhere in Europe, Vance was probably sleeping in luxury hotels, his family's money insulating him from consequence. And here I was, 10 weeks pregnant, with $300 to my name and no one to call for help. I could have been angry. I was angry. But stronger than the anger was something else, a fierce, protective love for the tiny human growing inside me. This baby didn't ask to be conceived in deception, didn't choose a father who would run when things got complicated. "It's just you and me now," I whispered, my hands spread across my still flat belly. "But I promise you something. You will never wonder if you're wanted. You will never question if you're loved. You will never feel like a situation that needs handling." The baby couldn't hear me yet, was barely more than a collection of rapidly dividing cells, but I talked anyway. I told stories about the buildings we'd see together, the life we'd create from scratch. I promised struggle but never abandonment, poverty but never emptiness, hardship but never lack of love. I made a vow that night that would shape every decision. For the next 26 years, I would not poison this child with bitterness toward his father. I would not raise him in the shadow of my anger. Whatever rage I felt toward Vance Maddox, I would swallow it, process it alone, keep it away from the innocent life growing inside me. Years later, I would learn pieces of the full truth. A friend of a friend who worked at Maddox Dynamics would mention, casually over drinks, that Richard Maddox had a reputation for handling problems that threatened the family image. Another acquaintance would tell me about seeing Vance at the Memphis airport once, 6 months after he'd left, looking like he was arguing with someone on the phone, pacing and gesturing with what looked like desperation. There were letters, I'd eventually discover, that never reached me. Airline tickets purchased, then cancelled. Moments of almost return that someone, probably Richard, expertly prevented. But that night on the balcony, all I knew was absence. All I had was the reality of abandonment and the choice of how to respond to it. I could crumble or I could build something from the wreckage. I chose to build. If you're still watching this, you understand this kind of pain, the kind that reshapes your skeleton, that forces you to become someone you never planned to be. Hit that like button if you respect single parents who carry on after being abandoned, and comment strong below if you believe in choosing responsibility when others run. Because what happens next will show you that sometimes the greatest strength comes from the moments when we have no other choice but to be strong. 6 months later, I went into labor at Memphis General's public ward, my hand clutched in my neighbor Tasha Green's instead of Vance's. Tasha, who'd heard me crying through the walls and showed up with tea and unexpected friendship. Tasha, who became the family I chose when the one I'd expected disappeared. "You've got this," she whispered, as another contraction ripped through me. "You're the strongest woman I know." The labor lasted 17 hours. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead like they were keeping time with my pain. The walls were institutional green, scuffed and marked by thousands of other women who'd passed through this same room, this same experience. A nurse I'd never met before held my other hand when the contractions got so bad I couldn't breathe through them. I went into that delivery room with nothing but fear, faith, and $53 in my checking account. What came out was a 7-pound, 3-ounce miracle named Zion, a name meaning highest point, because even from our lowest valley, I was determined he would rise. When they placed him on my chest, still wet and screaming his arrival to the world, I looked into eyes that were unmistakably Vance's, the same brown with gold flecks, and felt my heart break and heal simultaneously. "Hello, Zion," I whispered through tears. "I'm your mom, and I'm going to make sure you have everything that matters, even if we don't have everything else." The nurse asked about the father's name for the birth certificate, pen poised over the form. "Leave it blank," I said, kissing my son's forehead. "It's just us, and we're going to be okay." Tasha stayed with me through the night, helping when the nurses were too busy with other patients, bringing me water and telling me I was doing great, even when I felt like I was failing. In the morning, when sunlight finally streamed through the small window, she helped me figure out how to nurse Zion, laughing with me when we both fumbled through it. "You're going to be an amazing mother," she said, watching me cradle my son with the fierce protectiveness that had already become second nature. "I don't have a choice," I replied. "He's counting on me. That's what makes you amazing. You're showing up even when it's hard." I left Memphis General 48 hours later with a newborn, a folder full of social services information, and a determination forged in the fire of abandonment. Whatever happened next, Zion would never doubt he was wanted. He would never feel like a mistake. That was the promise I made walking out of that hospital, my son wrapped in a blanket the nurses had given us, because I'd forgotten to bring one from home. It was a promise I would spend the next 26 years keeping. The fluorescent lights in Memphis General's public ward flickered like they were keeping time with my contractions, harsh and unforgiving against walls that had seen too much pain and too little maintenance. 17 hours of labor, no epidural because my insurance wouldn't cover it, and Tasha's hand going numb from my grip. That's how Zion entered the world. When they placed him on my chest, still slick and screaming, everything else disappeared. The peeling paint on the ceiling, the woman in the next bed moaning through her own delivery, the fact that I'd have to leave the hospital in 36 hours whether I felt ready or not, none of it mattered. "Hello, Zion," I whispered, his tiny fingers wrapping around mine with surprising strength. "You're named after the promised land, baby boy, because you're going to be my home when I don't have one." The nurse barely looked up from her paperwork when she asked about the father's name for the birth certificate. "Leave it blank," I said, kissing Zion's damp forehead. Right there, with my son's first breaths warming my skin, I made a vow that would shape every day that followed. I would never poison this child with my anger toward his father. Vance had chosen his path, but Zion wouldn't pay for it. He would know he was wanted, planned for, fought for, even if only by one parent. The apartment on East 117th Street existed in two different worlds depending on the time of day. Mornings brought Mrs. Davis settling onto her stoop with her coffee, calling out warnings and encouragement in equal measure to the kids playing hopscotch on the sidewalk. The corner store owner, Mr. Kim, would prop his door open, letting the smell of fresh coffee fight against the exhaust fumes. But when the sun dropped behind the buildings, our block transformed. The hopscotch squares became territory markers. The older kids appeared on corners, their eyes tracking every movement with predatory awareness. Sirens became the soundtrack, and the thin walls of our apartment carried every fight, every breakdown, every moment of violence that poverty breeds when it's left to fester. I created rules for survival, for sanity. Never take Zion out after 8 p.m. Always carry him facing away from the corner where deals went down. Play music during the worst of the outside chaos, jazz, classical, anything to create a different world inside our walls. Keep routines sacred, breakfast at the tiny table, stories before bed, Sunday walks to the library no matter what. Our apartment became a fortress of normalcy. Yes, the radiator clanged like it was fighting demons. Yes, I had to put towels under the door to keep the hallway smoke out. But inside those four walls, Zion learned to crawl on clean floors, took first steps between second-hand furniture I'd painted bright colors, spoke first words while I pointed to pictures in library books. The design firm job came through Tasha's cousin, part-time, mostly filing and coffee runs, but with access to design software after hours. I'd strap Zion to my chest and work on portfolio pieces while he slept, creating dream spaces on screens while our reality included mousetraps and water stains. Days meant designing waiting rooms for dental offices and creating homey touches for budget motels, soul-crushing work that barely covered groceries. The real money came from night shifts at Metro Diner, where I poured coffee for cops, taxi drivers and insomniacs, while Mrs. Davis from 4 Billions watched Zion for $15, and the promise I'd help with her grandson's college essays someday. Twice a month, when even those jobs weren't enough, I cleaned penthouses in the upscale neighborhoods through an agency that didn't ask too many questions. I'd stand in those marble bathrooms, wiping mirrors that cost more than my monthly rent, studying the design choices, the flow of space, the way wealth created breathing room in every corner. One night, cleaning a bathroom with a rainfall shower and heated floors, I found myself crying, not from self-pity, but from exhaustion so complete it felt like my bones might dissolve. In the mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back, 25 years old but looking a decade older, dark circles permanent as tattoos, hands raw from bleach and ambition. But then I'd come home to Zion sleeping in his crib, a crib I'd assembled myself from discount store parts, and the exhaustion would transform into fuel. Every scrubbed toilet was another month of rent. Every poured coffee was another week of diapers. Every design project completed after midnight was another brick in the foundation of our future. Every night, no matter how late I got home, I read to Zion. Sometimes I'd fall asleep mid-sentence, the book dropping to the floor, but he never complained. He'd curl against me, his small hand patting my face like he was the parent and I was the child who needed comfort. "Tell me about when I was born," became his favorite bedtime request by age 4. "You were born during a spring storm," I'd say, editing out the pain and fear. "The nurses said you had the strongest lungs they'd ever heard. You announced yourself to the whole hospital. Was I a good surprise?" "You weren't a surprise, baby. You were a decision. You were chosen. You are my miracle who came exactly when you were supposed to." I never lied about his father, but I shaped the truth carefully, like bending wire into something that wouldn't cut. "Your father was very young," I'd explain. "Sometimes people aren't ready for the gifts they're given. That's not your fault or mine. That's just how some stories go." I bought books from thrift stores and the library's sale shelf. We made art supplies from household items, crayons broken into smaller pieces to make them last longer, construction paper rationed like it was gold. But I never rationed attention, never rationed love, never let him feel like we were poor in the ways that truly mattered. "Mom," he asked once at 5 years old, watching a father and son toss a football in the park, "why don't I have a dad?" "You do have a dad," I said carefully. "He just doesn't live with us." "But you have me, and you have Tasha, and you have Mrs. Davis, and you have Mr. Williams at the library who saves books for you. You are surrounded by people who love you." "Is that enough?" I knelt down to his eye level. "Love is always enough. And you, my brilliant boy, are more than enough exactly as you are." The Christmas. When Zion turned 7, we were decorating a tree I'd found abandoned on a street corner, still perfectly good, but discarded for something newer. I'd bought dollar store ornaments, and we were making others from construction paper and glitter that would shed everywhere for months. "Mom," he said suddenly, his face serious as he concentrated on cutting a snowflake. "Is my dad ever coming back?" The question I'd prepared for still knocked the wind from me. "I don't think so, sweetheart. Did he not love me?" I set down the ornament I was hanging and knelt beside him, taking his small face in my hands. Listen to me very carefully. Your father never met you. He left before you were born, so this isn't about you. How could someone not love a person they never knew? This was about him and his choices, his fears. You are completely lovable. You are loved completely. By me, by Tasha, by Mrs. Davis, by Mr. Williams at the library who saves books for you. You are surrounded by love. But not by him. No, I said honestly, not by him. And that's his loss, Zion, his devastating loss. He was quiet for a moment, processing with the seriousness that had always made him seem older than his years. I don't think I want to meet him, even if he came back. That's okay. That's your choice to make, and it might change as you get older. Whatever you feel is valid. I just have you, and that's better than having someone who didn't want me. I pulled him close, breathing in his little boy's smell of paste and juice boxes. You are so wise. How did you get so wise? I learned from the best, he said simply, returning to his snowflake. When Zion was 10, I was working 4 jobs. The design firm had given me more hours. I still had 3 night shifts at the diner. I cleaned offices on weekends, and I'd started taking small event planning gigs through a connection at the diner. Sleep became theoretical, food became whatever Zion didn't finish, and coffee became a food group. The night I collapsed, I was making Zion's lunch for the next day. One moment I was spreading peanut butter on bread, the next I was on the linoleum, the knife clattering away, my vision going black at the edges. "Mom!" Zion's voice sounded far away, then closer as he shook my shoulder. "Mom, wake up!" I tried to tell him I was fine, but the words wouldn't come. I heard him on the phone. When had he learned to call 911? Giving. Our address with perfect clarity, describing my symptoms like he'd been trained for emergencies. The paramedics arrived in 8 minutes. A woman named Linda Park checked my vitals while her partner kept Zion calm, explaining what they were doing in a voice meant to reassure a scared child. "When's the last time you ate a real meal?" Linda asked, shining a penlight in my eyes. "This morning." That wasn't what I asked. A real meal. Sitting down. More than coffee and whatever your kid left on his plate. I couldn't remember. Blood pressure's low, blood sugar's crashed, and you're dehydrated. She helped me sit up slowly. You're trying to run on empty, and bodies don't work that way. What are you doing that's got you this run down? Working, I said simply. How many jobs? 4. She looked at Zion, then back at me. You can't keep this pace. He needs you vertical more than he needs you superhuman. They wanted to take me to the hospital, but I refused. Couldn't afford the ambulance bill, couldn't afford the ER visit, couldn't afford to miss tomorrow's shifts. Linda made me promise to see a doctor within the week, left me with electrolyte packets and stern warnings about self-care. After the paramedics left, Zion sat beside me on the couch with a maturity that broke my heart. "Mom, I know about the bills," he said quietly. "I see you writing checks at 3 a.m. I know you skip dinner so I can have seconds. I hear you crying in the bathroom when you think I'm asleep. Baby, that's not your worry, but it is, because you're killing yourself trying to make sure I don't notice we're poor. But I noticed. And I'd rather be poor with a mom who's alive than have stuff and lose you. 10 years old, and my son was teaching me about priorities. You don't need to protect me from our life," he continued. "We're a team, right? So let me help. I can walk myself to school. I can make sandwiches. I can do homework at the library until you get off work instead of you paying Mrs. Davis." I pulled him close, breathing in his little boy's smell of pencil shavings and grape juice. "When did you get so wise?" "I learned from you. But Mom, you taught me to be strong, not stupid. And working yourself to death? That's stupid." His bluntness made me laugh through tears. "You're right. You're absolutely right. So what are we going to do differently? We. Always we. Never just me carrying the burden alone." The next day, I quit the office cleaning job. The loss of income terrified me, but not as much as the image of Zion calling 911 again, maybe too late next time. Through a regular at the diner, Mrs. Davidson, who always tipped 30% and asked about my design background. I got my first real event planning client. Her daughter's sweet 16, tiny budget but creative freedom. I transformed a church basement into a garden wonderland with thrift store finds and strategic lighting, and suddenly I had 3 referrals. The money wasn't immediate or impressive, but it was a start. More importantly, it was work that fed my soul instead of draining it, creativity that energized rather than exhausted. Tasha helped me set up a basic website, just a free template with photos of the few events I'd designed. She watched Zion on weekends when I had gigs, refusing payment, insisting that's what family did. Mrs. Davis spread word in her church community that I did beautiful work for honest prices. Slowly, painfully, things began to shift. I wasn't making more money necessarily, but I was bleeding less of myself to earn it. "I'm proud of you," Zion said one evening as I sketched centerpiece ideas at our kitchen table instead of rushing out to another shift. For what? For stopping. For choosing us instead of just money. I thought strength meant never falling, never failing, never admitting defeat. That night taught me something different. Strength was recognizing when your foundation was cracking and choosing to rebuild rather than collapse. It was accepting help, admitting limitations, and understanding that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop running yourself into the ground. Have you ever pushed yourself so hard to provide that you almost lost everything? Have you learned that real strength includes knowing when to rest? Sometimes the most powerful lesson we can teach our children isn't how to endure everything. It's showing them how to choose what's worth enduring and what needs to change. I was learning that lesson one day at a time, with a 10-year-old as my teacher and poverty as my classroom. At 13, Zion stood 6 inches taller than me and balanced on a knife's edge between the boy I'd raised and the man the streets wanted to claim. Our block had a way of recruiting kids his age, not through force, but through belonging, through easy money, through the promise that respect could be earned with dice and deals instead of degrees. I found him one October evening in the stairwell of our building, surrounded by older boys from the corner, dollar bills scattered on the concrete, dice in his palm. The shame that crossed his face when he saw me hurt worse than anger could have. "Upstairs, now," was all I said. That night, instead of yelling, I told him about people from our neighborhood, brilliant kids full of potential who thought they were too smart to get caught up until they weren't. About dreams deferred and then destroyed. About the difference between belonging somewhere for a moment and building something that lasted. "These streets don't care how smart you are," I said, holding his face between my hands. "They'll eat you alive and use your bones for dice. Is that what you want? Because if it is, tell me now so I can start mourning the son I'm going to lose." He cried that night, 13 and trying so hard to be tough, but still young enough to sob in his mother's arms. "I just wanted to belong somewhere. You belong with me. You belong in your future. You belong anywhere but those stairs with those dice." The next week, I enrolled him in an after-school program at the hospital, volunteering in the pediatric ward. Better to fill his time with purpose than leave space for the streets to seduce him. The moment everything changed came on a November morning when Zion was 15. We were on the crosstown bus, heading to his Saturday volunteer shift, when we passed Memphis General Medical Center. He pressed his face against the window, watching doctors in white coats stride through the entrance with the confidence of people who saved lives before breakfast. "I want to be in there," he said suddenly, not volunteering, not visiting. As a doctor, my first instinct was fear, not doubt about his ability, but terror about the cost, the years, the obstacles between a kid from East 117th and an MD after his name. "Medical school costs more than this building is worth," I said carefully. "Then I'll get scholarships, work study, loans if I have to." His reflection in the bus window was fierce with determination. "Mom, I've watched you make impossible things happen my whole life. This isn't impossible, it's just hard. 8 years minimum. Undergraduate medical school, residency. I know, the kids you'll be competing with have tutors, test prep, connections. I have something they don't." "What's that?" He turned from the window, and in his eyes I saw myself at 21, deciding to keep a baby I couldn't afford. "I have a reason. I've seen what happens when people in neighborhoods like ours don't have doctors who understand them, who knows what it means to choose between medicine and groceries. I want to be the doctor I never had." From that day forward, Zion became a machine of purpose. He woke at 5 a.m. to study before school, using the kitchen table while I slept on the pull-out couch 3 feet away. When the electricity got cut for non-payment during his junior year, he studied by candlelight, joking that if it worked for people centuries ago, it could work for him now. He took every advanced placement class his underfunded school offered, then taught himself the ones they didn't through library books and borrowed laptops. His essays for college applications weren't about overcoming poverty as an abstract concept. They were about the teenager who died from an asthma attack 2 buildings over because the nearest hospital was 40 minutes away by bus. About watching neighbors use the emergency room as primary care because no doctor within 10 miles accepted their insurance. About health inequality that wasn't statistics but faces he knew, names he could list. Weekends meant 12-hour shifts volunteering at the free clinic on Lamar Avenue where Dr. Patricia Williams became his mentor. She let him shadow her, taught him to take blood pressure readings, showed him that medicine was as much about listening as prescribing. "Your son's special," she told me once when I picked him up after a shift. "Not just smart, though he's brilliant. He sees people, not just symptoms. That can't be taught." "He learned it from watching our neighbors struggle," I replied. "From seeing what happens when people fall through the cracks. While Zion built his future one textbook at a time, my own career finally found traction. The Sweet 16 I designed in that church basement had led to 3 more parties, then a small wedding, then a corporate event that needed someone creative but affordable. By the time Zion turned 17, I'd registered Collins Design Solutions as an LLC, operating from our kitchen table but projecting professionalism in every email. Chloe Ramirez, a young woman from a neighborhood not unlike ours, with an eye for color and a steady hand with arrangements, became my first employee, though employee was generous when I could barely pay her minimum wage. Together, we transformed community centers into wonderlands, made conference rooms feel welcoming, turned the lobby of the Red Line Hotel from forgotten to photographable with a budget that wouldn't cover a single designer chair in the spaces I used to clean. We weren't rich, would never be rich, but for the first time in 18 years, we weren't one broken appliance away from disaster. I could buy Zion new shoes without skipping meals, could pay the electric bill on time, could even start a tiny savings account labeled Medical School Emergency Fund, though it held less than a single textbook would cost. Tasha had moved to Atlanta for a better job opportunity when Zion was 14, but we still talked every Sunday, her voice a reminder of where we'd started and how far we'd come. She'd been there for the worst of it, and I made sure she knew about every victory, no matter how small. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday in March, thin enough to be a rejection but heavy with possibility. Zion sat at our kitchen table, the same one where he'd studied for thousands of hours, turning it over in his hands. "Open it," I whispered, but he shook his head. "Together. On 3. We counted in unison, then he tore the paper in one quick motion. I watched his eyes scan the first line, then fill with tears. "Dear Mr. Collins, we are pleased to inform you of your acceptance to the University of Tennessee Health Science Center College of Medicine." The rest blurred as we both started crying, then laughing, then crying again. 18 years of sacrifice, struggle, and stubborn faith collapsed into that single moment. We'd done it. Not me, not him, us. That night, we celebrated with pizza from Tony's and grocery store cake, sitting on our old couch that had lasted through his entire childhood. Every bite tasted like victory. "No one in our family has ever been to college," I said, still processing. "And you're going to be a doctor." "We're going to be a doctor," he corrected. "Every late night you worked and paid for my books. Every time you chose my future over your present, you were earning this degree too. The financial aid package wasn't perfect. Loans still loomed large, but between scholarships, grants and work study, it was manageable. Barely, but manageable. And after 18 years of barely managing, we were experts at making it work. At 26, Dr. Zion Collins worked 70-hour weeks at Memphis General, the same public hospital where he'd been born. His supervisors praised his diagnostic skills, but what set him apart was how he treated patients, especially the ones from neighborhoods like ours. He'd sit on the edges of beds, speaking in whatever language or mixture helped scared people understand. He'd explain procedures without condescension, validate concerns others dismissed, stay late to make sure patients without stable housing had somewhere safe to recover. When gunshot victims came in, young people who looked like him, who'd made different choices or just had different luck, he treated them with the same respect as suburban heart attack patients. "You listen differently," an elderly woman told him once, after he'd spent 20 minutes discussing her diabetes management. "Like you actually hear me." He did hear them, because he'd spent his childhood listening to his mother whisper prayers over bills, reassurances over sirens, promises that tomorrow would be better, even when today seemed impossible. I'd expanded Collins Design Solutions by then, with a small office downtown and 3 employees. We'd designed events for some of Memphis's most prominent families, corporate galas, charity fundraisers. The irony wasn't lost on me that I now moved in circles adjacent to the Maddox family, though I'd carefully avoided any direct contact with their company. Sometimes, during rare quiet moments in his brutal schedule, Zion would ask about his father. Not directly, he was too respectful of my pain for that, but in careful circles around the truth. Did he have any medical conditions I should know about? Family history? Not that I'm aware of, I'd answer, which was true but incomplete. Was he smart? Did he finish college? Very smart. Engineering degree, what was his name? And there it would hang, the question I'd dodged for 26 years. Each time I'd find a way to deflect, suddenly remembering an urgent errand, asking about his shift, changing subjects with the skill of someone who'd been running from this conversation since 1997. I told myself I was protecting him, that knowing his father was Vance Maddox, whose pharmaceutical company's headquarters was visible from our old apartment, whose donations to medical research were announced in the very hospital where Zion worked, would only bring pain. That as long as I kept that name out of our house, out of our story, it couldn't hurt us. I thought silence was a shield. I was wrong. Secrets don't stay buried. They just wait for the worst possible moment to resurrect themselves. And that moment was coming faster than I could have imagined. The email arrived on a Thursday morning in November, the sender listed as Maddox Dynamics Corporate Events. I stared at the name for a full minute before my hand started shaking enough that I had to set down my coffee. Chloe noticed immediately. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." In a way, I had. 26 years of carefully avoiding any connection to that name, and now it sat in my inbox like a grenade with a pin pulled. "It's from Maddox Dynamics," I said quietly. "The pharmaceutical company." "The Maddox Dynamics?" Chloe's eyes widened. "Avery, that's huge. Open it." The message was professional, direct. Collins Design Solutions had been recommended by several previous clients for their annual Christmas gala. Would we be interested in submitting a proposal for an event hosting 300 guests at Maddox Tower, budget generous, timeline tight, exposure invaluable? The signature read, Maddox Dynamics Corporate Events, on behalf of CEO Vance Maddox. This could put us on the map, Chloe breathed over my shoulder. Real corporate clients, major exposure. Avery, this is the break we've been working toward. She didn't know. No one knew. 26 years of silence meant the name Maddox was just another company to everyone except me. My first instinct was to decline. Schedule conflict, creative differences, sudden illness, anything. But practicality fought against panic. This job would pay more than 3 months of our usual work combined. It would provide security for Chloe, for our other employees, for the office lease I'd finally been able to afford. And beneath the practical considerations lived something messier, curiosity. What had become of the boy who'd run from responsibility? What kind of man built empires while his son grew up counting pennies? "Set up the meeting," I heard myself say. "Let's see what they need." Maddox Tower occupied prime real estate in downtown Memphis, all glass and steel reflecting the winter sky, like a monument to ambition realized. I'd walked past this building hundreds of times over the years, never letting myself stop, never allowing the name etched above the entrance to mean anything more than architecture. Now I stood in the lobby, portfolio case in hand, watching my reflection in polished marble that cost more per square foot than my first apartment's monthly rent. The contrast wasn't lost on me. 26 years ago, I'd cleaned floors like these in other buildings. Now I walked across them as a business owner, meeting a potential client who happened to be the man who'd abandoned me pregnant and terrified. Professional, I reminded myself. This is business. You've built a career on transforming spaces. Transform yourself into someone who can survive this meeting. The elevator rose 43 floors in silence, my stomach dropping with each level gained. The executive conference room overlooked the Mississippi River, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the city like a postcard. I arranged my mood boards on the mahogany table, deep greens and golds, winter white accents, elegant Christmas aesthetic that felt warm without being excessive. "Ms. Collins." A young assistant in a pressed suit appeared at the door. "Mr. Maddox will join you shortly. Can I get you anything? Coffee, water?" "I'm fine, thank you." Jonathan Price, according to his name tag. He couldn't have been more than 25, efficient and polished in the way that money and good schools produced. 10 minutes passed. I used them to steady my breathing, rehearse professional phrases, remind myself that I'd faced harder things than this. I'd given birth alone. I'd raised a child in poverty. I'd built a business from nothing. I could survive one meeting. The door opened behind me. "Miss Collins, thank you for coming. I turned, and 26 years collapsed into nothing. Vance stood in the doorway, older but unmistakable. The dark hair now threaded with silver at the temples, the jawline sharper with age, lines around his eyes that hadn't been there at 22. But those eyes, still the same brown with gold flecks that had once looked at me like I was the only person in the world. He froze mid-step, his briefcase nearly slipping from his hand. "Avery," he breathed, and my name in his voice after so many years felt like violence. Jonathan glanced between us with professional confusion. "Mr. Maddox, this is the designer from Collins Design Solutions." "I know who she is." Vance's voice was hoarse. "Jonathan, could you give us a moment? The presentation." "Now, please." We stood on opposite sides of the conference table like it was a demilitarized zone, neither willing to cross into enemy territory. The assistant's footsteps faded down the hall, and silence filled the space between us, heavy with everything unsaid for 26 years. "I didn't know it's your company," Vance said finally. "Collins Design Solutions. You kept your maiden name. You expected me to take yours. We were never married." He flinched like I'd struck him. "Right. Of course. Should we discuss the gala?" I forced my voice into professional neutrality. "Or should I leave and save us both the discomfort? Please don't go." He moved to the table, careful to maintain distance. The company needs, someone who can create something meaningful. Your portfolio is exceptional. This event, it's important. It's a charity fundraiser for medical research, specifically focused on healthcare access in underserved communities. The irony was so sharp it could draw blood. Healthcare access in underserved communities. How philanthropic. Avery. The budget allows for live music or recording. I cut him off, gesturing to my proposal. "And you mentioned 300 guests," seated dinner or cocktail reception with stations. We fell into painful professionalism, discussing linens and lighting while our shared history pressed against every word. I noticed small details, the way his hand drifted to his chest occasionally, massaging like something hurt there, the prescription bottle peeking from his jacket pocket, the fine tremor in his fingers when he reached for the mood board I'd created. "This is beautiful," he said quietly, studying the winter concept. "You always did see spaces differently than everyone else." "I had good motivation to succeed," I replied coolly. "Single mothers don't get the luxury of failure." Completely. After 40 minutes of stilted design discussion, we'd covered everything necessary for the proposal. "The baby. Did you—" I turned slowly, meeting his eyes with all the steel 26 years of survival had forged in me. "Did I do what, Vance?" "Finish the sentence. Did you keep the pregnancy?" "Him, not it. Him, our son. And yes, I kept him." The color drained from his face. He sank into the nearest chair like his legs had given out. "A son? I have a son." "No, you have DNA somewhere in the world that happens to belong to a remarkable young man you've never met. I have a son. What's his name? Where is he? How—" He stopped, overwhelmed by questions that had waited 26 years to be asked. "His name is Zion Collins. He's 26 years old, and he's a doctor, a resident at Memphis General, saving lives while you sit in towers deciding which charities deserve your money." Vance's eyes filled with tears I didn't want to see, didn't want to acknowledge as genuine. "A doctor," he repeated. "He became a doctor, despite you, not because of you. He earned scholarships because I worked 3 jobs to keep him fed and housed and focused on school instead of survival. He volunteers at free clinics in neighborhoods your company probably owns property in. He's everything you're not. Present, committed, accountable." "I tried to come back," he said, his voice breaking. "That first year, I bought plane tickets 4 times. My father—" He blocked communications, convinced me you'd moved on, that reaching out would only cause more pain. I was weak. I was a coward. I let him make my decisions because it was easier than fighting. And the 2nd year, the 5th, the 10th... I stepped closer, anger finally burning through professionalism. "When did you stop being your father's puppet and become your own coward?" "Never. I never stopped being a coward." He looked at me with something like desperation. "But I'm asking now, begging, let me meet him. Once. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect a relationship. But he deserves to know where he comes from, to have his medical history, to make his own choice about whether I exist in his life." "You lost the right to ask me for anything the morning you packed your bags and chose money over your child," I said, each word carefully controlled. "I carried him for 9 months while you were in Europe. I delivered him alone in a public hospital while you attended your family's galas. I raised him through poverty, through danger, through every single milestone you missed. You don't get to walk back in now that the hard part is done. I'm not trying to claim credit. Good, because here's what's going to happen. I will consider telling Zion who you are. But if and when that conversation happens, it will be on his terms, in his time, with his consent. You will not show up at his hospital. You will not contact him directly. You will not use your money or connections to force a meeting." Vance nodded. His face controlled anguish. "That's fair. More than fair. Until I decide, you will be nothing more than a client. We communicate through Jonathan about the gala. You will not call me directly. Are we clear?" "Crystal clear." I picked up my portfolio case, my hands trembling despite my controlled voice. "I'll send the final proposal by Monday. The gala is December 23rd. The elevator ride down felt like falling. 43 floors to process that Vance Maddox wanted to meet the son he'd abandoned. In my car, I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I'd tell Zion after the gala, I decided, after the event was completed, after I'd had time to find the right words. Have you ever had to face someone who broke you but needed to stay professional? I drove home planning conversations I'd have after Christmas, rehearsing revelations I'd deliver in January. I thought we'd have time to ease into the truth. The truth had other plans. The Maddox Tower ballroom had transformed into exactly what I'd envisioned during those tense planning meetings. A winter sanctuary suspended 40 floors above the city. Towering evergreens framed the entrance, their branches wrapped in thousands of warm white lights that cast everything in a golden glow. Crystal centerpieces caught and scattered candlelight across tables draped in deep forest green linens, while a 20-foot Christmas tree dominated the far wall. Ornaments chosen specifically to reflect the medical charity theme. Stethoscopes rendered in silver, caduceus symbols in gold, tiny replicas of hospital buildings that had benefited from Maddox Dynamics donations. Chloe moved through the space with her checklist, adjusting a ribbon here, repositioning a candle there, both of us wearing the professional black we'd chosen to blend into the background of other people's celebrations. "This is your best work," she said, pausing beside me to admire the full effect. "Avery, when they see this, we're going to get so many referrals." "Let's just get through tonight," I interrupted, watching the first guests arrive through the main doors. Women in gowns that cost more than my car, men in custom tuxedos, all of them representing the world Vance had chosen over us 26 years ago. I spotted him before he saw me. My son in his white coat with his hospital badge clipped to the pocket, crossing the ballroom with the quiet confidence of someone who belonged in rooms like this because of what he'd earned, not what he'd inherited. Memphis General had sent 4 residents as part of their community outreach partnership with Maddox Dynamics, but Zion was the only one who made my heart simultaneously swell with pride and clench with fear. "Mom," he said, reaching me with a smile that still looked like the little boy who'd once helped me arrange dollar store ornaments. "This is incredible. You did all this?" Chloe helped. I deflected automatically, then allowed myself a moment of pride. "But yes, what do you think? I think you're the most talented person I know." He straightened his tie, a nervous habit from childhood. "I'm supposed to just circulate, be available if anyone needs medical assistance. Apparently the host has some cardiac history, so they wanted extra coverage just in case." The host. My hands went cold despite the room's warmth. "You look beautiful, by the way," Zion continued, not noticing my sudden pallor. "I don't think I've ever seen you in a dress this nice. Professional investment," I managed. "You look very handsome, very professional." He kissed my cheek. "I should go mingle. Try to enjoy your success, okay? You've earned it." I watched him walk away, my son completely unaware that his father was somewhere in this room, that the careful separation I'd maintained for 26 years was about to shatter in ways I couldn't control. Jonathan Price took the microphone at 8 o'clock sharp, his voice carrying over the gentle din of 300 conversations and the soft jazz from the string quartet I'd hired. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, please, it's my honor to introduce our host for this evening, CEO of Maddox Dynamics and this year's Humanitarian Business Leader of the Year, Mr. Vance Maddox." Applause rippled through the ballroom as Vance approached the podium, looking distinguished in his tuxedo, every inch the philanthropic billionaire. From my position near the kitchen entrance, I watched him scan the crowd, his eyes finding mine for just a moment before he began. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he started, his voice amplified through the sound system I'd tested personally that afternoon. 26 years ago, I stood in different rooms, making different promises, believing that success was measured in buildings constructed and profits earned. His hand went briefly to his chest, the gesture I'd noticed in our conference room meeting, gone so quickly most people wouldn't catch it. I've learned, slowly and painfully, that the ground we stand on matters less than the people we lift up. Those towers mean nothing if we build them on broken promises and abandoned responsibilities. The crowd murmured appreciatively, interpreting his words as humble philanthropy. I heard them as a confession. Tonight we're raising money for healthcare access in underserved communities, because treatment shouldn't depend on zip code or bank balance, because some of the most brilliant doctors in this city came from neighborhoods that statistics said should have destroyed them. His eyes found the section where hospital staff stood, landing on Zion with an intensity that made my stomach drop. Did he know? Has someone told him which resident was ours? We celebrate tonight not just success, but second. Vance's words slurred mid-sentence. His left hand gripped the podium while his right clutched his chest, fingers digging into the fabric of his tuxedo like he was trying to reach through bone and muscle to stop whatever was happening inside. The water glass Jonathan had placed beside him moments earlier tipped over, water spreading across the podium's surface and dripping onto the stage. "Mr. Maddox?" Jonathan stepped forward, uncertain. Then Vance crumpled, his legs folding beneath him, his body hitting the stage with a sickening thud that sent the microphone crashing down with a screech of feedback. Screams erupted. Guests surged forward and backward simultaneously, creating chaos in the carefully planned space. Someone yelled for help, while others pulled out phones, recording instead of assisting. "Is there a doctor?" Jonathan's voice cracked with panic. "I'm a doctor. Everyone move, please." Zion's voice cut through the noise with absolute authority as he pushed through the crowd, his white coat like a beacon of competence in the panic. I watched my son reach the stage in seconds, dropping to his knees beside the man who'd given him DNA but nothing else. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, 2 fingers to Vance's carotid artery, ear close to his mouth and nose checking for breath, palm flat on his chest feeling for rise and fall. Pulses thready, breathing shallow, he called out to Melissa Warren, one of the event nurses, who'd appeared beside him. "Get me the AED from the lobby, now. You," he pointed at a server frozen nearby, "call 911 and tell them we need cardiac support at Maddox Tower, 43rd floor. Possible myocardial infarction." Another resident handed him the automated external defibrillator, and Zion's movements became even more focused. He loosened Vance's tie, unbuttoned his shirt, placed the pads with the same steady hands that had once helped me make sandwiches when we couldn't afford much else. "Everyone stand clear," he commanded, as the machine analyzed rhythm. I saw myself 10 years earlier, watching those same hands dial 911 when I'd collapsed in our kitchen. The parallel was almost too perfect, too cruel, both of us saved by the person we should have been protecting. The world contracted to that stage, to the man I'd once loved convulsing under electrical shock while our son fought to keep him alive. Everything else, the decorations I'd agonized over, the guests whispering and recording, the Christmas tree's lights blinking their oblivious pattern, faded into background noise. I saw the river house, Vance's face when I'd told him I was pregnant, the joy that had seemed so genuine before it turned to abandonment. I saw the positive pregnancy test in that terrible bathroom, felt the weight of Zion as a newborn in my arms, remembered every promise I'd made to raise him without bitterness poisoning his heart. And now they were here together, connected by biology in crisis, while I stood helpless watching the collision I'd tried to prevent for 26 years. Vance's eyes fluttered open briefly, unfocused and confused. They tracked across the faces above him, Melissa, Zion, the other medical staff, then found me in the crowd. His lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear from 20 feet away, but I'd always been good at reading him. "He has your eyes," he mouthed. Then his consciousness slipped away again. The paramedics arrived in 12 minutes that felt like hours. They transferred Vance to the gurney while Zion briefed them with clinical precision, vitals, interventions performed, patient history as much as he knew it. "I'm going with him," I heard myself say, though I had no legal right, no official connection. "Are you family?" one of the paramedics asked. "Yes," I lied, because 26 years ago I'd almost been, and that had to count for something. Zion looked at me with confusion but didn't contradict, instead climbing into the ambulance to continue monitoring during transport. The ride to Memphis General was a blur of medical terminology, beeping equipment, and the sound of my son's voice keeping his father tethered to life. At the hospital, Dr. Michael Chen met us at the emergency entrance, his team already mobilized. "We've got him from here," he told Zion, professional courtesy between colleagues. "Suspected severe blockage, possibly multiple. We're taking him straight to the catheterization lab." Then Vance was gone, wheeled through doors that closed behind him, leaving Zion and me standing in the waiting area while our adrenaline crashed and reality set in. The waiting room was exactly as I remembered from 1,000 previous visits. Harsh fluorescent lighting, plastic chairs designed for discomfort, the smell of antiseptic and fear, posters about hand-washing and flu shots covering walls painted institutional beige. We sat in those uncomfortable chairs, Zion's hands still trembling slightly, the aftermath of the life-or-death response he'd just orchestrated. He stared at his fingers like they belonged to someone else. "Mum," he said quietly, still watching his shaking hands. "How do you know Vance Maddox? When you said you were family, I saw something in your face. What aren't you telling me?" 26 years of careful omissions, of protecting him from pain, of believing I knew what was best. All of it crystallized into this moment in this awful waiting room. Vance Maddox, CEO of Maddox Dynamics. "I know who he is, Mom. Everyone knows who he is. He's also the engineering student I met in a bookstore in 1997, the man who promised me forever then disappeared when I told him I was pregnant." I forced myself to meet Zion's eyes. "That man is your father." The words hung in the fluorescent-lit air between us. I watched comprehension move across my son's face like a slow-motion collapse, confusion giving way to shock, shock hardening into something I'd never wanted to see directed at me. Betrayal. "My father," he repeated flatly, "the billionaire whose Gala you just designed, whose company has buildings all over this city, whose pharmaceutical research I've literally cited in my residency papers." His voice rose with each sentence. "You knew all this time, every time I asked about him, you knew exactly who he was and where he was, and you just didn't tell me. 26 years, Mom. 26 years of he wasn't ready and he had his reasons and it's complicated. You let me think he was some broke college kid who couldn't handle responsibility, not a billionaire who chose money over us. He did choose money over us. That's not your choice to hide from me." He stood abruptly, pacing the small waiting area. "I'm not a child you need to protect anymore. I'm a grown man, a doctor, someone who deserves to know where half my DNA comes from, what medical conditions might be lurking in my genetics. Why—" his voice cracked. "Why wasn't I enough to make him stay?" "Baby, you were always enough. His leaving had nothing to do with— Don't—" he held up a hand, tears streaming down his face now. "Just don't. I don't even know what I feel right now." Pause for a moment and put yourself in Zion's position. If you discovered your parents had hidden the truth about where you came from for your entire life, what would you do? Comment "meet" below. If you'd choose to face the father who abandoned you, or walk away if you decide some doors should stay closed. And if this story has you completely hooked, hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear about the complicated truth about family, secrets, and second chances. My son stood in that waiting room, his white coat still carrying traces of his father's cologne from the close contact of resuscitation, his face a war between the child who trusted me completely and the man who just learned that trust had limits. "I just saved his life," Zion said finally, his voice hollow. "I just saved my father's life, and I didn't even know who he was." Dr. Michael Chen emerged from the surgical wing 3 hours after they'd wheeled Vance away, his scrub still bearing traces of the procedure. Zion and I stood simultaneously, our argument temporarily shelved in the face of life-or-death news. "He's stable," Dr. Chen said, and I felt my knees weaken with relief I didn't want to feel. We placed 2 stents. There was significant blockage in the left anterior descending artery and the right coronary artery. Another 30 minutes without intervention, and we'd be having a very different conversation. Zion's medical training kicked in despite his emotional turmoil. Prognosis? good if he makes significant lifestyle changes. This was a serious wake-up call. The man needs to reduce stress, change his diet, and understand that he's not invincible. Dr. Chen looked at Zion with professional respect. Your quick response at the gala saved his life. The AED, the immediate assessment, textbook emergency medicine under pressure. I was just doing my job, Zion said quietly. You did it exceptionally well. Dr. Chen glanced at his tablet. He's asking to see family. Are either of you? We're family, Zion said firmly, meeting my eyes. Complicated family, but family. We didn't go to Vance's room immediately. Instead, Zion led me to the hospital chapel, a small, quiet space where doctors often delivered bad news or processed their own grief after losing patients. We sat in the back pew, surrounded by the kind of silence that demanded truth. Tell me everything, he said. Not the edited version you've been giving me for 26 years. Everything. So I did. I told him about the river house and Vance's first lie about his identity, about the pregnancy, and Vance's initial joy that had seemed so genuine. About Richard and Elena Maddox calling me a situation, and their son choosing his inheritance over his child. About the disappeared phone calls, and the empty restaurant table, and the housekeeper saying Vance had gone to Europe. Years later, I learned that Richard blocked communications, deleted messages, created barriers, I continued. But Zion, that doesn't excuse what Vance did. He was an adult, he made choices, and those choices meant I raised you alone. Why didn't you tell me who he was? When I was old enough to understand. I took a shaky breath, because I was terrified you'd spend your life trying to earn the love of someone who'd already proven he could walk away. I was afraid you'd measure yourself against his success and feel inadequate. I was protecting you from rejection. But you were also deciding for me, he said gently. Mom, I get it. I understand your reasons, but I deserve the choice of whether to reach out, to try, to at least know where half of me came from. You're right. You deserve to know sooner. I was trying to protect you, but I see now I also took away your choice, your agency. I'm sorry. He sat quietly for a long moment, processing 26 years of revelations compressed into one hospital chapel conversation. I watched emotions move across his face, hurt giving way to understanding, anger softening into something more complex. I'm grateful, he finally said, for everything you sacrificed, every job you worked, every dream you postponed so I could chase mine. You're the reason I'm a doctor. You're the reason I know what commitment looks like, but I'm also angry that you made this decision alone for so long, and I'm confused about what I feel toward him. This man I saved without knowing he was my father. Part of me wants to walk away and never look back. Part of me wants answers only he can give. You don't have to decide right now, I said, taking his hand. Or tomorrow, or ever. This is your timeline, your choice. I need time, he said, to process, to figure out what kind of relationship, if any, I want with him. Can you give me that? I can give you anything you need. I went to his recovery room alone, needing to establish terms before Zion faced him. Vance looked diminished against the white hospital sheets, monitors beeping their steady rhythm, 4-line trailing from his arm. Without the tailored suits and executive presence, he was just a man who'd nearly died, fragile, human, mortal. His eyes opened when I entered, and something like relief crossed his features. Avery. They told me. Zion saved my life. He did his job. He's an exceptional doctor. Because of you, because you raised him to be extraordinary. His voice was hoarse, whether from intubation or emotion, I couldn't tell. I heard everything the doctors said. If he hadn't been there, if he hadn't acted so quickly, you'd be dead, I finished. So maybe use this second chance for something more than building towers and attending galas. He flinched at the harshness, but didn't defend himself. Does he know that I'm his father? I told him tonight, in the waiting room, after years of him asking and me deflecting. He's hurt, confused, angry at both of us for different reasons. Vance struggled to sit up straighter, wincing at the movement. I know I have no right to ask anything from either of you. I know that my father's manipulation doesn't excuse my own cowardice. I could have fought harder. I could have chosen differently. I didn't. No, you didn't. But I'm asking now, begging really, for the chance to tell Zion directly that I failed him, that my absence had nothing to do with his worth and everything to do with my weakness. I don't expect a relationship. I don't expect him to call me Dad or include me in his life. I just want him to hear me take responsibility. I studied the man who'd once been my whole world, now reduced to a hospital bed, asking for crumbs of contact with the son he'd abandoned. If Zion chooses to see you, you will not make excuses. You will not blame your parents or circumstances. You will own every single choice you made. Are we clear? Crystal clear. And whatever relationship develops or doesn't happens on his timeline. No pressure, no gifts to buy his affection, no using your money or connections to force closeness he doesn't want. I understand. 20 minutes later, I stood outside Vance's room with Zion, giving him one last chance to walk away. You don't have to do this now, or ever. It's completely your choice. I know. He straightened his white coat, his armor, his identity, separate from the complicated biology that connected him to the man inside. But I think I need to hear him say it. I need to look him in the eye and hear him admit what he did. I'll be right outside. Stay, Zion said. Please, you've been here for everything else. You should be here for this too. We entered together. Vance's eyes immediately filled with tears when he saw Zion up close, not across a gala ballroom or through the chaos of a medical emergency, but standing beside his hospital bed as his son. You have Avery's eyes, Vance said, his voice breaking, and her determination. I can see it in how you carry yourself. I'm told I have your height and your aptitude for science, Zion replied, his voice carefully neutral. Though I'd like to think I got my sense of responsibility somewhere else. The words landed like the blow they were meant to be. Vance absorbed them without defense. You're right. You didn't get that from me. He took a shaky breath. Zion, I failed you before you were born. I let fear and cowardice guide my choices. I abandoned your mother when she needed support most. I missed 26 years of your life, every milestone, every achievement, every moment that mattered. That's on me. Not on my parents, not on circumstances, on me. And I'm sorry. I'm so deeply sorry. Why? Zion asked. Why did you leave? Because I was 22 and terrified of disappointing my family, of losing my inheritance, of being cut off from the only life I'd known. I chose money and comfort over responsibility and love. There's no excuse that makes that okay. Zion stood silently for a moment, processing. I saved your life tonight because that's my job, because I took an oath to preserve life regardless of who the patient is. What you do with this second chance, that's entirely on you. I don't owe you forgiveness. I don't owe you a relationship. And right now, I don't even know if I want one. I understand, Vance said, and I respect that completely. Good. Zion turned toward the door, then paused. But if you're serious about doing better, about being accountable, then maybe, someday we can talk. As two adults, not as father and son because you haven't earned that title, but as two people connected by biology trying to figure out what that means. After Zion left to finish his shift, I stood to follow, but Vance's voice stopped me. Avery, wait, please. What is it, Vance? I know I have no right to ask this, but someday when Zion has had time to process, when I've proven through actions instead of words that I've changed, would you consider giving me a chance to earn not just his trust, but yours as well? The question hung between us, loaded with 26 years of history and hurt. Right now, my energy is focused on Zion, I said carefully, on helping him navigate this revelation and whatever relationship he chooses, or doesn't choose to build with you. Whatever might happen between you and me, that's so far down the list of priorities it's barely visible. I understand. And if anything ever does happen, it won't be because of grand gestures or expensive gifts or the charm that worked when we were kids. It will depend entirely on what you do, not what you say. On whether you show up consistently, whether you respect boundaries, whether you prove that second chances mean actual change. That's fair. More than fair. 3 months later, life had settled into a new configuration. Not neat, not simple, but functional. Vance attended cardiac rehabilitation twice weekly, genuinely stepping back from the 70-hour work weeks that had nearly killed him. He met with Zion for coffee every other Sunday, neutral territory, limited time, conversations that were stilted and careful but slowly becoming more natural. They didn't talk about the past much. Instead, they discovered shared interests. Both loved architectural design. Both had terrible taste in action movies. Both overthought every decision to an almost comical degree. Zion still called him Vance, not Dad, and might never make that shift. But they were building something, fragile, uncertain but real. My design firm had exploded after the gala. Even a medical emergency couldn't diminish the beauty of the space we'd created. Chloe and I hired 2 more people, moved into a larger office, started bidding on corporate accounts I'd once only dreamed about. Financial security, real security, finally felt possible. I watched my son and his father across a coffee shop one Sunday morning, observing from my car before heading to my own meeting. They weren't hugging or laughing or looking like a perfect reunion. They were talking, listening, occasionally smiling, 2 adults trying to build a relationship from scratch. Second chances don't erase the past. They don't guarantee love or perfect reunion. They don't automatically heal wounds that took decades to form. But they offer something perhaps more valuable, the opportunity to choose differently now than you did before, to acknowledge failure and build something honest from the rubble. This story carries 3 lessons I learned the hardest way possible. First, don't abandon your responsibilities. The easy choice in the moment creates decades of consequences you can't outrun. Second, don't let anger raise your children. Zion didn't grow up bitter because I chose, every single day, not to poison him with my pain. Third, if life hands you a second chance, whether you're the one seeking redemption or the one deciding whether to grant it, use it wisely. It's not about fairness, it's about who you want to become. If this story moved you, if you see yourself in Avery's struggle or Zion's conflict or even Vance's regret, do me a favor. Hit that like button right now. Subscribe to Mr. Steele Rich Stories for more deep, emotional narratives that challenge how we think about family, forgiveness, and second chances. But most importantly, share this video with someone who believes they're too late to make things right. Share it with the parent who walked away, the child still waiting for an apology, the person carrying guilt from choices they can't undo. Because it's never too late to take responsibility, though it might be too late to guarantee forgiveness. Comment below and tell me, should Avery, Zion and Vance keep building this fragile relationship, or should some doors stay closed? What would you do in their position? Now go share this with someone who needs to hear it.